Today I wanted to take a look at a Fisher SA-100 that I just finished restoring a couple weeks ago. Now that I'm confident that I did a decent job at least, the amp still works and everything seems to be fine. A couple weeks later, I'm ready to do a bit of an overview. This amp runs on 471 89 tubes, which are a beefier version of EL84s. So this amp was used a lot in its original, with its original parts. So when I received it, it was very crispy inside. One of the issues that is present with this amp is it gets very warm. So we're talking the outside, the chassis can reach 120 degrees, possibly more. So there's a couple of mods out there that will allow you to have a power supply that runs a little bit cooler. I didn't do any of those. I left the circuit original and just went ahead and replaced the parts. So as you can see, the main filter cap here on top is been replaced. I used an authentic cap. It's a little bit different dimensions, but it fits fine and I think it looks better. The other one was a little taller, but I don't know, it looked a little bit excessive, a little bit out of place, and I think this cap just kind of fits in nicely. This also has a GZ34 rectifier, and you're able to adjust the DC and AC balance for each channel via pots that are accessible through the front. I have the caps, but I've pulled them off. So basically the caps sit here, 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 and here under normal usage. But because I've been working on it, I just took them off because they're hard to get on and off, and I don't want to chip up the paint while trying to remove them. So I just left them off until I'm sure that this thing is dialed in, and then I'll reinstall them, hopefully never to have to remove them again. In addition, in the front you have the test points in the bottom left corner. Allows you to bias your tubes. So in its stock configuration, you can only bias by pair, and you would go for, I believe, 60 millivolts. Don't quote me on that. It's all of this information is present in the owner's manual. It'll tell you how to set everything, how to do it. Just refer to that. There's copies available online. But you would just go ahead and remove the straps that are present on the test points, and then you'd be able to bias each channel. Some mods out there allow you to bias per tube, but that includes, for the most part, drilling more holes so that you can have more test points, and that's not something I wanted to do. You may be able to see that the power transformer is a little bit tilted. Yeah, you can see it there. So this amp had a very rough ride, unfortunately, and a little bit of damage, and that's one of the things. It can be fixed. It's I just haven't done it because you want to do it right and you don't want to damage the chassis while you do it. So I'm trying to think of the best way to do it. Probably we'll have to strap the chassis and the transformer down and then ratchet one of the sides so that it straightens it. Or possibly I could remove the transformer and just try to straighten the metal just by heating it up or something like that. We'll figure it out. I was able to find a pair of new old stock 7247s, Telefunkens. So this tube is basically a combo of a 12AX7 and 12AU7. So that was a nice pair to find, given that Telefunken makes some of the best 12AX7, 12AU7 tubes. So I figured if it was a combo, they'd probably be the best as well. I have a second one of these amps, and when I received it, the output transformers are not lined up, which is, most people are never going to care or notice, but the way I am, I did notice, so I went ahead and unscrewed them. Very easy to do. just standard bolts. You just unbolt them and then you can slide them around, move them. You want to be careful doing that just because the paint on these is notoriously fragile. I mean, it's not going to rub off on your finger, but if you drag the metal brackets across the paint, you're going to cause some scratches. So just be aware of that and be gentle. And you can get some nice lined up transformers. These aren't perfect, but it's mostly, I think, that the transformers themselves aren't perfect, which is understandable given that they're handmade. So this is the front of the amp, and you'll see some of these online will be run backwards. So I'll show you the side real quick. These are vents, and inside of here are big old resistors to dissipate a bunch of voltage. Okay. Obviously, once I get through this, I'm going to flip the amp over and show you my work. But for now, I'll just show you the outside just so you get an idea of what this amp looks like in kind of the real world. Here you have a center channel output, which you would go out from the amp into another amp, and then it would allow you to basically fill the center space if you had a big room where left and right seem to be a little too far apart. I'm not sure if that's really a consideration these days, but you have the option, or you can just simply disable the center channel output. There's also a mono stereo switch. The mono switch, it doesn't make these mono blocks, but it basically, from my understanding, I may be wrong, if you use one channel, probably input A, it'll output that single channel out through both of the channels, if that makes sense. So like on a Macintosh, the mono stereo switch would allow you to basically bridge the amp. That's not the case here. The biggest issue that I had getting these going and sounding properly was the switch. Sounding correct, sounding proper, I guess. Sounding right was the switch. It was very, very dirty. In fact, the contacts on it were black, which might become a problem later. So I'm not sure if there is a replacement out there, but maybe the best option would be to replace that switch, or you can take the innards out of it. So if there were like the pins, and then I could just leave the bracket, the chassis of the switch there, that would be best, given the fact that they're riveted in, the switch is riveted in. So that's something that you want to be careful of. On my second amp, it was almost the same way, not quite as bad, but definitely oxidized enough to affect the signal going through that switch. Continuing on to level A and level B, one of those switches was very dirty. I'm not sure what caused that condition. I suspect that one channel had far too much voltage going through it, given the condition of some of the resistors and what they look like when I opened up the amp. And so that switch, the contacts were like black, but the dirt on the contacts came out pretty easily. So it was just a matter of taking them apart. You just pry open the pins very carefully, find a tiny screwdriver, something you'd use for eyeglasses, and just use that to get under the pin. Then use a slightly larger screwdriver to pry it up a little more, and then you should be able to get a pair of needle nose and just open the clip all the way. Shouldn't break, but you want to be careful and go slow with it, obviously. So took those apart, cleaned them, reassembled them. This was all after I replaced the resistors and capacitors. But once I got everything back together originally, I wasn't getting even sound from the channels. And I knew that it was, I went over my work, I knew it wasn't my work. So I figured it had to be, the switches, and with the help of Audio Karma and a few posts, I was sort of, that belief was sort of reinforced. So then I went through the process of cleaning the switches. I would just clean them if I were you. That'd be what I'd be doing while I have the amp apart. I would just take them out, pop them out. They just clip right in. There's no screws. you just unclip them from the outside here. Right here, there's they're just kind of wedged in there, and same over here, and then they will slide it back through the chassis. But if you have a bunch of parts in there, I believe level B is difficult to get out, if I have the orientation correct. So just want to keep that in mind. So if you have it all apart, that would be the time to pull those pots out. Okay, so we've seen the outside. Paint's in great shape. This is really about as clean as you can expect. This didn't come with a cage, which was actually a good thing, because the cage is, I think, what damages the paint on most of these, especially when they're shipped with the cage on and no protection under the cage. You're going to scratch up the amp, and clearly that's not ideal. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video for a second, because I don't have any kind of mount that I can mount my phone to myself. So I need both hands to flip the amp over, and then I'll show you my work on the inside. Okay, so we have the amp flipped over now, and as you can see, the restoration I did was extensive. About the only thing left in here are a couple of resistors I haven't gotten to yet, and some ceramic capacitors. This took a long time, and what ended up happening was when I got into the amp, I started testing resistors, and they had all drifted. And we're talking significant amounts of drift, where we're talking all of these voltage dissipating resistors on both sides were off by 20% on average. And you know, they drifted up, so I think that was contributing to a lot of the heat issues. And also, there were like all kinds of residue on the chassis. So these clearly, had seen better days. And as I continued to test all of even the smaller resistors, a lot of them had drifted as well. So I just said, forget it. I'm going to already change a majority of these resistors, just replace them all. So that's what I did. And obviously replace the electrolytics, wanted something good quality, but I really overdid it on the 53Ds here. You don't need to go to this extent. You probably just get some atoms, some Sprague atoms, and they're black, smaller, and likely easier to mount and deal with while you're trying to solder and all that. And so, part of the problem with using something that's this overrated is that over the years, what will happen in theory is that it'd be almost as if you were just storing the capacitors, since you never come close to reaching the rated voltage. And so the capacitance will increase over the years. This would take many years to become an issue, but I was made aware that this isn't the proper way to do it. So I think the original capacitors were 50 volts rated. So if you did 50 or 100, that'd probably be a much better level than what I did. Another thing is I likely should have put this capacitor on this side. It was originally here, but given all the heat, probably would have been best practice to move it over here and, swap where the resistor was. I even went as far, so there's basically, you can see here, 5 electrolytic capacitors. I changed all of the coupling caps as well. I did one side first and then listened to it, and to me it sounded better with the new caps, even if they're not the originals. The amp previously just sounded like it was very tubey, very warm, just a lot of distortion. You could just hear it. And so this modification, it's not really a modification, but just changing the parts, spending the $6 I think that these caps cost, I think really improved the sound. So, I mean, it's up to you, but if one of those caps were to fail, one of the originals, you would have a lot of problems potentially. So to me, it was a pretty easy decision just to go ahead and replace them. Even if it did change the sonic character, I think it's safe to assume after now 60 years that you weren't hearing the original amp anyway. So up to you though, of course. I tried my best here to run really clean, straight leads and I think for the most part I did a pretty good job. The original setup of this amp is really messy, and it's not really messy, but messy, I'd say. There's just, you can still see it, there's just long lengths of wire that don't necessarily need to be as long as what they are, but at the same time I didn't have the heart to go and shorten everything. So I did it this way, and for the most part everything is just about optimized in terms of length, other than the wiring. As I'm looking here, I noticed my soldering on the mount points to the terminal strips, various terminal strips. I did this because on some of these I was noticing, and others have noticed, Dave Gillespie being the first, that these weren't really grounded. So you were getting resistance from here. If you were to measure with one probe here and one probe here, you would get it wasn't a short, basically. So that can cause issues, I guess, in the circuit. So I went ahead and followed his advice while I was kind of troubleshooting my unlevel amounts of audio coming out of each channel. And I went ahead and did that. I definitely would do that while you have everything out of here, so you're not melting components, because you're gonna have to turn your soldering iron up very high, probably to the max, in order to get the solder to stick to the chassis. You'll also want to take a little bit of sandpaper, like 3000 grit or 1000 grit or more, just to get some of the oxidation off of the copper plated chassis so that it'll adhere. And that'll help you there, but you're still going to need to really get a hot soldering iron. You probably want to wear a glove, because you'll need to hold your soldering iron almost vertical in some of these in order to reach them without melting a bunch of stuff, and it gets hot in the hand. So I think that about covers it. You know, if you have one of these and it's original, you want to get under here and check the oxidation that you're seeing on the chassis. It literally ate the plating off, and that's from the original cap that was there. It was leaking electrolytic fluid, and that stuff is corrosive. So after many years, you'll end up having something that looks like this. My other amp doesn't look like this, thankfully, but it's just the bottom, so who cares? In terms of components, resistors, you can see obviously I use Sprague for the capacitors. These are all Vishay CMF, which is like, these are all within, I think every single one of the resistors is like, other than obviously the large 10 watters, are 1% or narrower. So a few of them are 0.1%, just depending on the cost. If they were close in cost, I just got the tightest tolerance I could possibly get. Yeah, it's clearly like not necessary to do that, but I just wanted to, and I think they look kind of cool, so that's what I did. And so, you know, you can be pretty confident that both channels are balanced up to the point that the potentiometers can allow, because they're really the weakest link in the chain at this point. And then I tried to also, as you can see in the middle, I tried to dress up the wires a little bit, use some zip ties to get them as tight as I could. So I think that about covers it. If you were to remove these pots, you'd go ahead and unsolder all these points, or 1, 2, 3, unclip, push these clips in, and then push it out, and then you'd be able to pull it out and then work on it. Same on this side, though, as you can see, this one is much tighter. I could barely get it out with the components. It took me like 10 minutes to wiggle it out without breaking anything. So I would advise to have the parts out, then pull it out, and it'll save you a lot of time. Happy to answer any questions. I've been posting more videos lately. I have a lot of audio equipment that I've been working on during the pandemic, and I'm happy to share more videos. I've noticed that my Macintosh MC30 video has gotten a good amount of views over the last year or so. So that's nice to see. This channel is really not monetized, and I don't need it to be monetized, but I would appreciate it if you would like thumbs up, I guess, the video and subscribe. since it's obviously nice to have these videos be seen by people and not just be a video of somebody listening to music, which really, to me, doesn't provide a lot of value given you're listening to it through your headphones or your computer speakers. But that's just me. So anyway, I think that covers it, and thanks for your time. Thanks for watching if you watched the whole thing. And once again, make sure you like and subscribe, because I'm going to have more videos like this coming up. I've got an MC225 I'm working on, a Marantz 8B that I'll be working on. I have all the resistors for that one. I'm going to go ahead and replace a good chunk of them because they've drifted. And I think I'm going to do some Marantz 19s and Marantz 18s that I have. So once again, thanks, and see you soon.